Hey guys, this is Mike, your host at the Craft Beer Storm. How are you? Today we got a nice podcast with Butch Heilshorn of Earth Eagle Brewings in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He's also author of a book, Against All Hops, Techniques and Philosophy for Creating Extraordinary Botanical Beers. He's doing a lot of interesting things at Earth Eagle Brewings. If you're in the Portsmouth area, you should check him out. But interesting podcast ahead, so let's get to it. Hey, we're here with Butch Heilshorn of Earth Eagle Brewings in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He's a neighbor of ours. He also published a new book. He's an author of a new book. It's called Against All Hops, Techniques and Philosophy for Creating Extraordinary Botanical Beers.
Greetings.
Butch, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, brother. Doing good.
Excellent.
I'm glad you were able to make some time for us.
Yeah.
Because you're doing some interesting stuff there at Earth Eagle. We have a lot of people that come in and say, "Hey, did you see that new beer, the Earth Eagle? You know, meat and all kinds of herbs." And I'm like, "Yeah, they do. They do a lot of interesting stuff, but they're experimenting, pushing the envelope, which is good. You know."
Yeah, keeping it interesting, keeping it exciting.
Yeah, you have to do that. Yes. So let's start out with your story, how you got started. Where are you now? Earth Eagle Brewings. Your new book. What are you planning to do? Maybe you can brief us on that.
Well, let's see. I'm definitely a longtime beer geek. I've always been a fan of beer and. Very interested in tasting new beers. I remember as a kid, having the usual, what do we have? Like, the Schaefer and the Schlitz and the Black Label and all that great stuff. And, and I remember a couple of beers along the way, like Heineken Dark was like a revelation. And then Guinness Stout just blew my mind. And then a friend took me to a bar in New York City. I think it was called the Burt Palace or something like that, where I had my first Belgian beers. And, it just one level of dazzlement after another one. So, I was into it, and my ex-wife was an herbalist. So for years I was living essentially in her apothecary, and surrounded by all these jars of herbs and tinctures and all this stuff, and never really connected with that at all. And she put me on to this book that one of her herbal icons wrote. This guy, Stephen Herod Buhner, wrote this book called Sacred and Healing Beers. And suddenly this great interest of mine, beer, was kind of mixed with this interest of hers, which were herbs. And the book was mostly about these beers that had all these unusual, plants in them. And that kind of lit the fire for me, really.
And these are called Gruits, right? Am I correct?
Well, Gruit is really, believe it or not, a modern term. If you look back, if you do the research, you will not find that word meaning a beer necessarily. It meant all sorts of things. It could have been a tax. It could have been ingredients for beer. It could have been a spiced malt extract that brewers bought to add to their beer. That word is just a real hard one to pin down.
That's interesting. A lot of people throw it around as, okay, well, I'm brewing a beer without hops, so it's a Gruit.
Well, and again, I think in modern parlance, that is the word, and that is what it means. It's little or a beer that's basically not hop centric, like 99.99% beers are these days. Right. But anyway, so the other thing that happened right around that time was, my sister met Alex McDonald. And shortly thereafter, he and I met, and we discovered this mutual interest in beer. And I was trying to, get my nerve up to actually try and brew some. And he had done it before, so I said, "Well, why don't we get together?" And he was all in, and we set up a little extract system on my picnic table out in the backyard, and we were off to the races.
That's how things start.
Yeah, which is what so many of us have done. And, and the whole point was not to just brew beer, but to brew a beer that we couldn't get anywhere, to follow one of these old recipes and see what we came up with. And the funny thing is, man, I remember it vividly, tasting the beer when it came out of the fermenter, and it was just marvelous. It was sort of a takeoff on the Dogfish Head's Worldwide Stout, except there were no hops and there were a bunch of other cool herbs in there. Tasted just magnificent. But unfortunately, when it came out of the bottle, a couple of weeks later, it just tasted like ass. It was horrible. So fortunately, that did not shut us down. And shortly thereafter, Alex built an all grain system, all hard piped and everything.
Right.
And Brewzilla, we called it, and that delivered a lot of great beers for us.
That's how you start. I mean, Earth Eagle started with a 1-barrel system, right? Am I correct?
Yeah. We got a little Blickman set up and got a lot of chuckles from people. And fortunately, we were able to pretty quickly turn it into a 2-barrel system with these inserts that Blickman sold. So that was the system.
Inserted on top. And I came to visit you guys. I think you had the 1-barrel system, and I had an idea of opening a brewery, and I guess we were connected. So I came by and I visited you in your space, but you've expanded big time from there. Yeah.
Well, I don't know about big time. I mean, we're up to 5 barrels now, and I don't see it getting much bigger in the near future. We got
a lot, if not most of your beer is on premise, right?
Yes, where the margins are best.
That you are correct. That's what we're striving for. Yeah.
The more you can sell at your own place, the better off you're going to be doing.
Oh yeah.
And it almost feels like a loss when you're selling logs to folks,
Right.
But we're doing a little of that, not a lot. And really, particularly in the summer months, it's all we can do to keep up with our own demand. So we really don't distribute much until it starts getting colder out and things slow down in Portsmouth.
And you keep some revenue coming in, yeah. But you're right downtown in Portsmouth. We're kind of on the outskirts, but you're right in the center of everything. Which your location is fantastic. To be in the middle of it, but not like on a main street anywhere, I think has served us really well. Yeah.
Joe Blow, who's looking for a Bud Light, is not going to is not going to find our place.
No.
And, because I think Joe would be disappointed and we'd be disappointed in Joe, I think, So the people who do show up and take the time to find it are usually people who already know about us and know and are there to try some interesting twists on beer.
Yeah, so you're and you also maybe get into this. You're a forager who goes out and collects these ingredients that you use in your beer. Can you go into that a little bit?
Oh yeah. That was a super fortuitous meeting. I remember. Let's see, it was Tyler, who used to be the head brewer at Portsmouth Brewery. Introduced me to Jenna Darcy at the P Brew bar, and we kind of hit it off. And she's a big part of our success with these beers. And she basically goes out into the local forests and fields and the seacoast area. Swamps and bogs actually have a lot of juicy stuff to brew with. And during the season, from probably about May to October, she's picking us stuff as it comes in to bloom, except for blueberries. I think we're the only guys on the street that make a beer with green that is unripe blueberries. So,
really?
but generally,
is it a sour taste or?
It's a little tart, not overwhelmingly so.
Yeah.
And there's so many blueberry products out there, so it was kind of fun to do a riff on it without actually using what everyone else is using.
Right.
So. But yeah, anyway, she's been a really a partner in the whole the botanical beer thing. And again, half of what we do is kind of quote unquote normal hop beer, but for this other bit of our production, she's been really crucial piece of it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what kind of interesting stuff do you have now that she's collected, in your opinion? And
Well,
what are you going to make with it?
yeah, I mentioned the green blueberry, so we have it's sort of a lighter ale, maybe kind of a blonde, called Green Blues, and that features those berries. She hooked us up with a bunch of sweet gale, which is kind of like a classic brute herb. It's there's a lot of records of these beers in the British Isles and Northern Europe, and that's a really crucial ingredient, and it grows. It's not all over the place, but the further north you go, the more of it you see. And we use that in a bunch of different beers. Also, Yarrow. She gave us we got a big shipment of it from her recently, and that grows all over the place. In fact, I think we have Yarrow growing out of the cracks in our pavement at
Really?
the brewery. So,
Wow.
and again, that's another ingredient that goes into a lot of different beers.
So I guess she knows what she's picking, because you don't want her to pick like hemlock or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to
really,
be careful. Yeah,
it's a great idea not
Yeah.
to poison or kill anyone. I'm definitely down with that idea.
I think what you're doing is awesome, but I'm like, oh man, what if she picked? But I guess she knows what she's doing. Apparently, well, you're still in business, and nobody's been poisoned so far. So that's good. It's interesting. But
it's that's a really good point, though. Bringing that up, I think a lot of people really get afraid of going out of their comfort zone with what they put into beer, and it doesn't take a lot of research or effort to kind of figure out what's good and what's not, what's safe and what's not. And I had a little bit of my own fear to get over, but you do a little reading, you talk to some people, you make some good contacts, and suddenly that's just not an issue anymore.
Yeah. I mean, we do use some local products, but it's more, traditional, like honey. We have a honey brown ale, and we use maple syrup. Hey, we use local buffalo wing sauce. I think we talked about this.
There you go.
I was trying to do. I was calling you guys the masters of meat, because you use moose. Tell me about the moose jaw meat and beer, and some of the meat beers that you did, because those are very interesting.
We do probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 of those a year, depending on what we can source. And it's not something we really go out of our way for, but we do have some friends that have got some access to stuff. So I think the last one we did was actually an elk head beer. We had a buddy who was able to procure this rather large head. And the usual routine with these beers is we'll skin them in-house and then smoke them somehow. Like we'll either we've used smokers, we've used grills, and a fun thing is that we'll save the stalks from some of the herbs that we get and use those for the smoke, rather than like your typical applewood or mesquite or whatever. We use these stalks, which definitely give a noticeably different flavor to everything. And then we usually just hang these heads in the boil, and
wow.
And the big issue when you're brewing with meat is fat, of course. And so
Right.
basically, when we're knocking out, we just watch. All the fat, of course, is at the top of the boil kettle, and we just make sure we knock that pump off before it starts sucking any of that fat up.
You skim it off the top, or I know we
Yeah,
talked
well,
about
I mean, you
this
can
before.
do that, but
Yeah.
why bother? But if you're doing like a homebrew batch, you can definitely make a broth first, and then put that broth in the freezer, and then just the fat will congeal into a little frisbee on top of your pan, and you can just
Right.
pop that off and use it for cooking. Don't toss it. It's great stuff to fry an egg in or whatever.
Oh yeah, my
but
aunt in Canada does the turkey, for Thanksgiving, and then she saves the turkey fat.
Yeah,
and the next day she makes pasta, and she just throws it on. It's delicious.
I bet it is. My mouth is watering just hearing that story.
I'm telling you. But fat is good. Yeah, fat is good when you use it correctly. But yeah, you told me about the Frisbee before. I think we talked about it regarding putting bacon in beer as well.
If we could roll the boil kettle into a freezer somewhere, that would probably be a nice way to do it. But yeah, if you just cut that pump before the level gets to the point where it's going to start sucking fat, you're in good shape. Mm-hmm. And again, it wasn't something that we really set out to do. I talk about it in the book a little bit. There was just we had heard that another brewery had won some medals for a porter with pig's heads, and then we thought, wow, that's just crazy, And there were a couple of people. I think it might have been at a homebrew meeting that we were having this discussion, and little did we know, one of the guys who was there had access. And I think the next day or 2 days later, the guy's like, "Yeah, I got a pig's head for you. When do you want me to bring it over?" And we were like, "What? Are you kidding?" And then it was like, well, opportunity's knocking here. I guess we ought to give it a go. And
so you did the beer with the pig's head, yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't really something we were shooting for. But the other thing too is that there is a history of meat beer, if you will. In the 1500s, they did brew that in the British Isles, and it was more of like a way to get nutrients to people who couldn't really eat. So they could drink some of those, nutritious, whatever proteins and fats and whatever else it is you get out of meat.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So it's definitely a thing, and it's been a thing for a long time. But yeah, there's only a few of us who dabble with it. That's for sure.
So tell me more about the book. I know that you had mentioned that you just came out and said, "Hey, I wrote a book," and I was like, "Wow, where did this come from?" But how did that develop?
It's a cool story. One of our customers just had a chat with me one day, and he's like, my wife works for this little publishing company, and I think what you guys are doing here would be right up their alley, like the kind of books that they do. I think that it might click, and the timing was interesting because I was really thinking about I've got all this experience, I got all this stuff we've done, and it'd be really satisfying to write it down and kind of, for my own edification, let alone for selling a book or whatever. But so this guy comes through and he sets up this phone interview between me and the owner of this company, Page Street Publishing in Salem, New Hampshire. Wow. And 45 minutes into the conversation, it's like, oh my God. And the guy said, the owner says, Butch, I really wasn't expecting much from this conversation, but he said, I'm pretty excited about this, and I think we can do something. So
it is an interesting story, and you're making some good stuff. So yeah, why not?
Yeah, and it took, I think it was the better part of 2 years before things really started to happen with this thing. Things move very slowly in publishing land, apparently.
Wow.
But eventually they came through. I got a nice advance, and took me about 9 months to write it, doing like a couple hours each morning before I went to the brewery. So,
wow. And you have a lot of photographs as well, I see in the book. Yeah.
A high school buddy of mine got the gig. It was something that they had to okay, and they had house photographers and stuff. But I really wanted to work with one of my friends, one of the people in the neighborhood, to kind of share the wealth a bit. And they like Jay's work, and that's typically in a review, in all the reviews of the books that are out there. I think it's the first thing people mention is the photographs. So
yeah, you keep it local, and you share, share your, story, and have local people. It goes with the local ingredients as well. Just have some local people help you out. So.
And I know, as far as my own preferences go, I like books with good pictures.
Oh yeah.
I want. It's nice to read, but it's nice to look at some pictures.
Yeah, it's not under I think it's under the cooking genre, and not the beer, or both, or how is it?
I think it's probably both. I mean, it's primarily, I guess, a recipe book.
Right.
But in each recipe, there's a different mix of herbs, and I go into some of the history and some of the different uses for the herbs, some of the folklore and stuff. So, there's a lot of other stuff in it other than just like, how do you make this beer? And the beginning, there's a couple of chapters with some history and philosophy, if you will. And so, yeah, you definitely don't have to be a brewer to enjoy the book. Being interested in beer or appreciating beer would certainly help, though, of course.
Yeah, no, I mean, it looks great. Yeah, and that's why I wanted to get you on, because it seems very interesting.
And I learned a lot too, I mean, I did a lot of research. I definitely upped my understanding of these things in the process of writing the book. I feel like half of the time was probably more like just me reading through books or looking on stuff at the internet and things like that, and really educating myself on a level that I hadn't been before. So it was a cool process for that as well.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing through this podcast. It's like, I hear other people have podcasts. I'm like, I can do this. So, but I've talked to so many different people with different perspectives on beer and, local things and, how to approach that. I'm learning as I move along, but it's just, I've expanded my knowledge greatly, which is awesome.
Yeah. I mean, and it seems like people in the beer and booze industry like to talk about it and like to share their ideas and their experiences. Unlike, I think, other businesses where it's a much more competitive.
Everybody likes
situation.
It is a very collaborative thing, especially in New Hampshire here. When I started, when I thought about opening the brewery, I approached a lot of, brewers, and they're very helpful, like Throwback, and then you guys, and, some up in York. They've been very helpful with getting me going, and we've kind of stayed in touch over the years and shared different things. And now we're on a podcast together, which is awesome, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Full circle.
Full circle. Here we go. So, yeah. So, I mean, what do you think, you're a local craft brewery. What do you think some of the challenges of craft beer today and local brewers?
Well, I think the big challenge has 3 initials, and it's I and P and A, I think. People, I mean,
everybody wants an IPA. I know.
Jeez, there's just so much more to beer.
I keep telling people it's like over 200 categories. You don't have to just have and then we have people coming in. I mean, we have stouts and we have darker beers and brown ales and porters. I have to infuse Oreos, into my my Java porter, and I got people to love it. Now it's called cake, right? But they love it. But I got them drinking dark beer, so it's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's important to push the flights. I think it's really important to say, look, for particularly someone who's new to the brewery, it's like, look, I know you want that IPA, but before you do that, why don't you just see what else we got and give your take a little taste tour before you go to your old, go-to. And, sometimes people, are pleasantly surprised and they find something that they think is more interesting than an IPA. But, at Earth Eagle, we got them covered too. If they want an IPA, we definitely, make a bunch of good ones. So we got them covered, but it just, it's a weird, to me anyway, it's kind of a weird groupthink, sheep behavior thing where people just are like, okay, I'm an IPA guy, so that's what I'm going to get. IPA. And okay, well.
I think what it is maybe is a lot of people are crossing from the lager, the bland lager, thinking of what beer should be, and then getting into craft beer, and then they find these IPAs, and you're like, oh my God, this is awesome. Because that's what I did. I mean, when I crossed into, I used to drink like Coronas and stuff. Now I drink, I don't want to single out beers, but, those are kind of lagers. But, you get into the craft beer world and you have these IPAs and they're delicious. The hops just smack you and you're like, wow, that's an awesome beer.
Look, I've got nothing against IPAs in general. Yeah. And I remember vividly the first time I had one, probably about 25 years ago. I had a Harpoon IPA.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure it was the one that Todd Mott was involved with.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And that beer blew my mind. I mean, it really, I was like, wow, this is awesome.
Yeah.
And I still drink IPAs for sure. I drink a lot of Finest Kind, but, and I've had the hazy New England IPAs, and I mean, so it's not my issue isn't really with IPAs per se, but it's just that come on, man, keep an open mind and see what else is going on. That's all.
I agree with you. I agree. I spoke to Todd too, and he's like, you know what? I'm not going to make an F in New England IPA. I'm just not going to do it. I'm like, I'm with you, brother. I'm with you.
Yeah,
there's so many different brewers out there, but that's what we try to do. I mean, we only have 6 tap lines. We're a small brewery, but I encourage everybody, just take, do a sample of each and just try it before you go and order that IPA, because there's some other good stuff out there, and a lot of times they change their mind and maybe get a stout or get that cake or something like that. Or
and they just wouldn't do that if you just served them up that IPA right off the bat, and that was the end of it.
And it kind of educates people, and that's the reason why we're doing this podcast as well, to educate people who just don't know, how many great beers there are out there. And
I mean, it's an overwhelming variety. It really is.
Oh yeah. So we're trying to get people to go towards craft beer, and your view of big beer. And I mean, what do you see the environment? I mean, I go into a store and I see 90% of the beer aisle as this big kind of suitcase beer, 24 cans for $10. And what would you say to somebody who still buys that type of beer and about craft beer? Try to encourage them.
I'm not going to bust anybody's chops for, buying what they enjoy. I mean, that's America. That's what we do. Mm-hmm. There was a buddy of mine who lived across the street from me, and he was definitely a committed Bud Miller Coors type of guy, and his thing was that he had the ABV dialed in. Like, he knew exactly how many of these beers he could have before things started getting fuzzy. And his main complaint about craft beer was, man, I don't want to just have one beer.
Right. And
all those damn craft beers are all such booze bombs that, I have one or two and I'm toast, And what I would say there is that, no, craft beer does not mean a ton of booze. And if that's your experience, then you just need to look a little harder. That's all. There
are a load of sessionable beers that are out there that are delicious. Yeah.
And there's more and more as time goes on, because we all realize at a certain point, like, on a nice hot summer day, you can't be in the bag after one beer. That's just not, it's not what you want to do.
Yeah. By sessionable, just to clarify that term, it's somewhere between maybe 4 or 5%, somewhere around that range, for craft beer, I would think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would just say anything below like 4.5 is probably, because there's a lot of threes, out there in the market and stuff.
Right.
It's definitely becoming a thing, and the better brewers have discovered that you can make a very tasty, satisfying beer without having a bunch of alcohol in it. So
right. I think that's a real good thing. Founders makes a good one, the All Day IPA. I don't know if you had that one.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's pretty good beer. Yeah.
But I would definitely encourage people to look for the New Hampshire version of that beer. I think we have a very odd dynamic in our state where most people who drink beer do not drink New Hampshire beer. Unlike Maine, unlike Vermont, it might be true in Massachusetts as well. There isn't a lot of appreciation for the fact that there are little guys in the neighborhood making better beer than these guys with these ginormous beer factories, that are 10 football fields long and are all automated and computer driven, and there's some of these beers. A lot. I would say any small brewery is definitely putting some soul into their product, and I think that transfers generally into good taste for most of them.
And that's what we're kind of pushing, and we're telling people, look, if they go into a restaurant, and they see, it has 10 tap lines and 9 tap lines, or like these big beers or beers from out of state, go to the manager and say, look, there's a lot of local breweries here that, we want to see on these tap lines that, they're producing great beer.
Yeah.
So we're trying to push the local. Yeah.
bar owners and restaurant owners are just as sensitive to the market as anyone else. And if people go in there and say, "Hey, this isn't cool. I'm not interested in supporting a giant conglomerate that's based in Belgium or Brazil. I want to support my guy down the street. I want to support the guy who's in my state." I think there's definitely a lot of room for improvement there for sure.
Yeah. So that's the challenge, but we're trying to preach the gospel of local beer and get out there, buy local, not just local beer, but local products, and there's a lot of small businesses out there.
Yeah, and the thing that I've bumped into over the years is the retort to why aren't you drinking local beers is there's not a lot of good local beers, and you know what? Mm-hmm. I think maybe 5 or 10 years ago that was the case. But anyone who was at the New Hampshire Brewers Festival in Concord, which I think was mid-July this year,
right?
It was amazing. There was nothing less than solid beer everywhere. And just the year before, I remember having several beers that I just didn't finish and couldn't really. They weren't that good. And just in the space of a year, I think mm-hmm. New Hampshire breweries have really come a long way. Right. I mean, everything I had, I at least liked. And a lot of the stuff was really great.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
So it's, the quality is definitely rising. And it's definitely, I think, at a level where anybody can find a good New Hampshire beer that they'll like, a good go-to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So, I wanted to kind of wind things down, and maybe you can tell people how to find you, get some information on the brewery. Also, your book. How do they get a copy of your book?
It's our mothership site is eartheaglebrewings.com. And there's links there for the book as well, againstallhops.com, if you want to just go right to that page. And we're on the Facebooks, we're on the Twitter, the Instagram, all that stuff. It'd be pretty easy to find us, and we're pretty good about the social media. We're at least posting 5 or 6 times a week. Whether it's the latest beer or the latest thing on the menu or something about one of our servers or brewers. And we also throw a lot of industry stuff up there. I came across some old footage of this home brewer back in England back in the 50s that we just tossed up on our site and had a ridiculous amount of likes and interest in. So it's not just a running commercial for Earth Eagle Brewings. It's definitely geared more towards general interest, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys are doing a lot of good stuff. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
And so your book is on Amazon as well, or?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. I think it's on a lot of the usual big sites. But I would say if you're in the neighborhood, buy your copy at Earth Eagle Brewings or at A&G Homebrew. Just again, sort of that buy local mentality. We definitely will get a better share if we're selling out of our place rather than Amazon, which of course, I don't know. I think the prices are like they cut the prices in half, and they have the world over a barrel, so they basically just tell people what they want to do. So, But anyway, you can read up on the book there certainly, and there's some reviews and whatnot. But
yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're in Portsmouth area, stop into the brewery and pick up a book and have some great beer, and and then also visit Beara Brewing Company. We're located 2800 Lafayette Road. Shameless plug, but we're both in Portsmouth. We're at the opposite ends, but
we got a lot of good breweries in between too. I mean, I think Portsmouth is really turning into a great destination for anyone who's interested in beer and wants to make the brewery tour. And I think there's more breweries popping up just about every month, it seems like.
Right. Yeah. Just in the past year, a couple have popped up, and I think more are in the works. And just every time I listen to people come in and say, "Oh, that new brewery," I'm like, "Where is this brewery?"
Right.
But I got to visit.
When it happens quick.
I got to go. I got to take a trip around and visit everybody. But hey, well, I appreciate you coming on today, Butch, and keep doing what you're doing. It's very interesting. And,
thanks, Mike. I appreciate you reaching out, and best of luck to you and in your endeavor as well.
Yeah, thank you. We're trying to spread the gospel and educate people, and I appreciate you being on.
Right on.
All right,
Thank you.
Butch. Okay, thanks.
Take care, Mike. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye. Yeah, that was Butch from Earth Eagle Brewings in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Glorious Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where we are. And the author of the new book, Against All Hops, Techniques and Philosophy for Creating Extraordinary Botanical Beers. If you're in the Portsmouth area, you should go check them out. They're right downtown. And if you like this podcast, if you like what we're doing, if you like the message, we're preaching the gospel here of craft beer, leave us a rating on iTunes. Subscribe to the podcast. That's awesome. Give us a rating, leave us a review. We're also on Stitcher. That makes everything much better for us and gets the word out, and we get more attention, and we just propel this thing into the stratosphere, which is what we're trying to do. And we're trying to preach that there is an alternative to watered down mass-produced beer, and that's locally produced craft beer, delicious craft beer. So until next time, guys, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.